Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Thursday, May 15, 2025. The Supreme Court hears a case on the 14th Amendment's birthright citizenship clause and President Trump's executive order to redefine it to not include children born in the U.S. to undocumented immigrants. But much of the argument concerns whether nationwide court injunctions should be allowed. Coming up, we hear from the justices and get analysis from Brett Samuels, The Hill's White House reporter. Senate Republicans blocked Democrats' attempt to bring up a bill to require a Trump administration report on El Salvador's human rights record and any steps to comply with court orders on U.S. residents deported to prisons in El Salvador. House Republicans' budget resolution bill may be in trouble one day before the Budget Committee plans to take it up, with some Republicans already saying they'll be voting no. Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy testifies before a Senate Appropriations Subcommittee about air traffic control upgrades. The EPA Administrator Lee Zeldin goes before a House Appropriations Subcommittee, asked about a just-announced decision on so-called forever chemicals in water. President Donald Trump speaks to U.S. troops at an air base in Qatar before flying to United Arab Emirates. And the President and Secretary of State Marco Rubio suggest a Ukraine war peace agreement can only happen when President Trump meets with Russian President Vladimir Putin. Also, Vice President J.D. Vance speaks at the National Peace Officers Memorial Service for National Police Week. Joining us now to talk about the Supreme Court's birthright citizenship case, oral arguments heard today, is Brett Samuels, The Hill's White House reporter. Thank you for being with us. Why this case now?
Yeah, certainly. Well, this obviously stems from the executive order that President Trump signed right after he took office, which sought to end birthright citizenship. But these arguments were not about specifically the constitutionality of that order. It was not about striking down that order. It was focused on sort of these nationwide injunctions that have been imposed over this order to block this order, which, of course, we've seen more broadly on other Trump executive orders, these nationwide injunctions. So Supreme Court listened to arguments specifically focused on this birthright citizenship case, and essentially they were hearing arguments and determining in this process whether to claw back those nationwide injunctions, whether those injunctions should be rolled back separate from sort of the constitutionality of the order itself.
What did you hear from the justices? Did you get a sense which way they may rule?
Yeah, certainly. It seemed, on the basic question of the constitutionality of the citizenship order that Trump issued, justices didn't seem interested in defending that or signaling that they were open to that itself. But, on the question at hand about rolling back these nationwide injunctions, certainly some conservative justices, at least appeared open to it. They raised some concerns. It seemed that, perhaps lower level judges were overstepping their authority or essentially wielding that nationwide injunction power too broadly. So it does seem for the issue at hand in these arguments in this hearing that, at least some of the court did appear sympathetic to the argument that the federal government was bringing here.
President Trump himself posted about the case right before the oral argument began.
Yeah, he absolutely did. From the Middle East, where he's traveling this week. It was interesting. His post, of course, was focused on sort of the argument for ending birthright citizenship. So, he was not necessarily directly addressing the question at hand in these arguments about nationwide injunctions, about, whether courts are abusing their power. He has, of course, made that case previously, but when he weighed in just before these arguments got underway today, certainly he was focused on the rationale for ending birthright citizenship, argued that, allowing birthright citizenship made the U.S., quote unquote, a stupid country. So certainly he was sort of digging in on his decision to issue that original executive order. But certainly his administration is watching these hearings closely.
We're talking with Brett Samuels, The Hill's White House reporter. How important is this case legally and politically? Let's start with politically. How important is this to the president, just rewriting birthright citizenship?
Yeah, this is something that Trump talked about during his first term, ending birthright citizenship. And at the time, it faced legal questions, legal challenges, to the point that he didn't necessarily, follow through on it in quite the way he did. He did this term. It was one of his first actions when he took office as part of this raft of immigration orders that he signed, was to end birthright citizenship, which, of course, has been protected under the 14th Amendment for years, certainly his administration. So, this is certainly a key campaign promise, something that his administration has long talked about, his allies have long talked about, and is, while certainly not the only sort of lever here, it's one of sort of the levers that Trump pulled upon taking office to try and crack down on immigration, try and crack down on the flow of people into the country.
And the importance of the case legally, if the justices were to overrule their precedent, they're overruling their precedent. But there's also that point about nationwide court injunctions. So this could have ramifications for the other challenges to other executive orders the president has issued, right?
Right, absolutely, yeah. So certainly could have a rather significant ripple effect, not just when it comes to the birthright citizenship challenges that have been, or I should say that order that has been blocked by those legal challenges, but it could trickle other nationwide injunctions that have been put in place because of legal challenges to things like, lawsuits over pauses to government funding, lawsuits over, efforts to roll back climate actions or protections for LGBTQ individuals. So certainly, a lot more at stake in this particular hearing when it comes to nationwide injunctions than just the fate of this birthright citizenship order, since the courts have really been where a lot of opponents of these policies have gone to find relief.
Brett Samuels, The Hill's White House reporter. You can find his articles at thehill.com. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much for having me.
And now some of the oral argument in the consolidated Supreme Court cases, Trump v. Casa, Trump v. Washington, and Trump v. New Jersey. Justice Sonia Sotomayor questioning U.S. Solicitor General John Sauer.
The argument here is that the president is violating not just one, but by my count, 4 established Supreme Court precedents. We have the one ARC case where we said fealty to a foreign sovereign doesn't defeat your entitlement, your parents' fealty to a foreign sovereign doesn't defeat your entitlement to citizenship as a child. We have another case where we said that even if your parents are here illegally, if you're born here, you're a citizen. We have yet another case that says even if your parents came here and were stopped at the border, but you were born in our territory, you're still a citizen. And we have another case that says even if your parents secured citizenship illegally, you're still a citizen. So as far as I see it, this order violates 4 Supreme Court precedents.
Yeah,
and you are claiming that not just the Supreme Court, that both the Supreme Court and no lower court can stop an executive from universally from violating those holdings by this court.
We are not claiming that because we're conceding that there could be an inappropriate case.
Only a class, only
Can
by
I
a
hear
class.
Can I hear the rest of his answer?
A Rule 23 class action. And then the more fundamental point as to all those Supreme Court decisions you referred to.
So what do we do temporarily?
Temporarily, the court may issue, the lower courts may issue injunctions that remediate the injuries to the plaintiffs that appear before them. Lower courts, in appropriate cases, may certify class action.
So when a new president orders that because there's so much gun violence going on in the country, and he comes in and he says, I have the right to take away the guns from everyone, then and he sends out the military to seize everyone's guns. We and the courts have to sit back and wait until every named plaintiff gets or every plaintiff whose gun is taken comes into court?
In appropriate cases, courts have certified class actions on an emergency basis. We found at least 4 cases in recent years where that was done. But more fundamentally, we profoundly disagree with the characterization of the merits. This is now fully briefed in the Ninth Circuit in case number 25-807, where we describe how that characterization of the holding of Wong, Kim, Ark, and the other decisions is profoundly incorrect. And
You
that
still
is
have
counsel.
Supreme Court Justice Sonia Sotomayor questioning U.S. Solicitor General John Sauer in today's oral argument in the consolidated cases on the district court rulings against President Trump's executive order on birthright citizenship. Jeremy Feigenbaum is New Jersey's Solicitor General, here questioned by Justice Samuel Alito.
So what do you say about the practical problem? So let's put out of our minds the merits of this and just look at the abstract question of universal injunctions. What is your response to what some people think is the practical problem? And the practical problem is that there are 680 district court judges, and they are dedicated and they are scholarly, and I'm not impugning their motives in any way, but sometimes they're wrong. And all Article III judges are vulnerable to an occupational disease, which is the disease of thinking that I am right and I can do whatever I want. Now, on a multi-member appellate court, that is restrained by one's colleagues, but the trial judge sitting in the trial judge's courtroom is the monarch of that realm, and there are situations in which trial judges, the president does something. It could be President Trump, it could be President Biden, it could be President Obama. The trial judge says this is unlawful, and I'm going to enjoin it, and I'm convinced I'm right, so I'm not going to stay the injunction. And then an application is made to the Court of Appeals to stay the injunction. The Court of Appeals gives it the back of the hand, and then the case comes immediately to us in the context of an emergency application. And some of us have said, well, we don't think we should do anything in those situations unless it is indisputably clear that the court below was wrong. So what do you say to that practical problem?
So we're mindful of the practical problems. I will say the states have had a through line as well across administrations. We have never believed, even as nationwide injunctions restrained policies that we favored, that they were categorically off the table. We've always taken the position that they are sometimes available in narrow circumstances, whether we like the policy or don't like the policy. And so you might have some cases where the nature of the harm, this is the DACA example from my friend on the other side, where the nature of the harm which was Texas saying it had to give benefits to residents in the state, is actually entirely remedied by a nationwide state-only injunction that applies just to Texas, because that might incentivize individuals to leave Texas, and then Texas doesn't have to give them benefits anymore. So you might have a case like that. But sometimes you are going to have cases where it is impossible to remedy the state's own injuries, and the alternatives are not practically or legally workable. And that describes this case perfectly. And so I don't think the answer is a bright line that means even in those situations, it's not possible for the states to get relief.
Jeremy Feigenbaum, New Jersey Solicitor General, questioned by Supreme Court Justice Samuel Alito. You can find the audio of the oral argument in today's consolidated case on birthright citizenship. It's Trump v. Casa, Trump v. Washington, and Trump v. New Jersey at our website, cspan.org. And CNN writing about the oral argument, the Supreme Court on Thursday seemed open to lifting a nationwide order blocking President Donald Trump from enforcing his birthright citizenship policy, even as it wrestled over the practical implications of allowing the administration to deny citizenship documents to some people born in the U.S. Several conservative justices signaled deep reservations with the ability of lower courts to issue nationwide injunctions, but at the same time seemed to be searching for other ways people could, in the short term, stop a policy that would upend more than a century of understanding about American citizenship. That was from CNN. Also from the Washington Post, in a ruling issued on a separate case before arguments began in the birthright citizenship case, the Supreme Court said unanimously that the totality of circumstances must be considered when determining whether a police shooting is justified, not just the split seconds before the officer opens fire. The broader standard is likely to make it easier for victims to prove allegations of excessive force in court, reporting from the Washington Post. And this is Washington Today. Senate Republicans, begins a Bloomberg article, defended one of the Trump administration's most controversial immigration strategies Thursday as the chamber voted against providing more transparency around deportations to El Salvador. The Senate voted 45-50 to reject advancing a Democratic-led resolution requiring a report to Congress on the administration's compliance with court orders and El Salvador's human rights record. The Trump administration's deportations to El Salvador have been in the spotlight as Kilmar Abrego Garcia's case has been at the center of a political and legal fight. That was from Bloomberg. Senator Tim Kaine, Democrat of Virginia, spoke before the Senate vote.
It's a privileged motion available to any senator directing the administration to produce a human rights report about a nation, in this case, El Salvador. Senate Resolution 195 directs the Secretary of State to produce a report to this body that would be available not only to us but to the American public about the human rights record in El Salvador. And a couple of the clauses of the resolution, I think, are specific about this particular case. The report should contain information about the treatment of citizens or residents of other countries, including the United States, non-Salvadorans, who are being detained or imprisoned in El Salvador, including any opportunity provided to such citizens or residents to demonstrate that they're being wrongfully detained or imprisoned. We should all want to know whether Americans detained in El Salvador have an opportunity to demonstrate that they are wrongfully imprisoned. The report will require that. The report would require an assessment from the Secretary of State of the conditions in El Salvador's Centro de Confinamiento de Terrorismo, CICAT, including an assessment of allegations of torture and other gross violations of human rights. Remember again that the Trump administration has acknowledged that at least one of the individuals who was deported mistakenly. He has been in prison for some time. If he's not there now, he was for some time in CICAT. We should want to know whether Americans imprisoned there are subject to torture or other gross violations of human rights. The report should include a description of any actions that the United States government is taking to ensure that the government of the Republic of El Salvador releases U.S. citizens being detained or imprisoned in El Salvador in compliance with United States court orders regarding their return. And finally, the report would require information, a description of actions the U.S. government is taking to provide due process in compliance with U.S. law for relevant persons detained or imprisoned in El Salvador.
Senator Tim Kaine, Democrat from Virginia, on the Senate floor before the Senate voted not to advance this bill. The vote was 45-50. Story from the Hill, the Republican package full of President Trump's legislative priorities is on thin ice as hardliners threaten to block the legislation when it arrives at the Budget Committee Friday morning. Congressman Chip Roy, Republican of Texas, and Congressman Ralph Norman, Republican of South Carolina, both say they plan to vote against advancing the GOP's mega bill in its latest form when it comes up for a key vote in the House Budget Committee, enough to stop it from moving forward. 21 Republicans and 16 Democrats sit on the Budget Committee, which is where the 11 components of the party's big, beautiful bill will be merged into one package. Congressman Brandon Gill, Republican of Texas, however, is expected to miss the vote because he is at home for the birth of his first son, meaning opposition from Roy and Norman is enough to block the measure if all Democrats are present. That was from The Hill. House Speaker Mike Johnson, Republican of Louisiana, spoke to reporters today on Capitol Hill.
If you do more on salt, you have to find more in savings. So these are the dials, the metaphorical dials I'm talking about. That's what is involved here. When you're trying to craft a piece of legislation that is this comprehensive and this complex, it requires a lot of thought and deliberation. We are trying to do this in a deficit-neutral way. That was the commitment that we made all along. I understand there's different numbers floating around, but we had a ratchet that the House Republicans decided to stay within and effectively find at least $1.5 trillion in savings. And then you can spend effectively, by extending the tax cuts, $4 trillion. That we are going to meet that rubric, that ratchet, so to speak. And that was the commitment that we made and that we will fulfill. And let me say, we cut $1.5 trillion in spending. It will be the largest spending cuts of any government in the history of planet Earth, okay? This is a serious, serious move towards fiscal responsibility, which the Congress owes the American people. When this bill is passed, one of the reasons the big, beautiful bill is so important is because I'm convinced it will send a message of stability to the stock market, the bond markets, to job creators and entrepreneurs and risk takers and the people that make the economy go. tax rates will be made permanent. That'll give people stability for planning purposes. We will send a message about how serious we are about the debt and the deficits by maintaining neutrality, and we will get the U.S. economy going again. We will also ensure, most importantly, the American people do not have the largest tax increase in U.S. history after the end of this year, which is what would happen by default if we don't get this job done.
House Speaker Mike Johnson, Republican of Louisiana, speaking to reporters today on Capitol Hill. He referred to SALT, that stands for State and Local Tax Deduction. It's a deduction that is currently at $10,000 capped. That's from the 2017 tax bill. And in the proposal that came out of the House Ways and Means Committee, that would go up to a maximum of $30,000. But for people under $400,000 in income, there are members of the Republican Party from New York, some from California, that would like it to be higher. They call themselves the SALT Caucus. Nick LaLota, one of them from New York, spoke to reporters.
The SALT Caucus, the saltiest five of us, have said internally what it is that we could ultimately say yes to. But to announce that number now in front of you all would limit our ability to negotiate moving forward.
Have you presented that to Speaker Johnson?
Yeah. Have we done what?
Presented that number to Speaker Johnson?
No, what we presented most recently was 62,124, effective 2025, index moving forward for inflation. We haven't gotten a bona fide counter offer to that. We're eager to hear what that counter is. We want to get to yes. We want a lot of those elements that are going to be in the big, beautiful bill to pass. My constituents enjoy a lot of the provisions that were included in the 2017 bill that built up prosperity and job growth and wage growth and low unemployment, low inflation. But New Yorkers, we got screwed on that $10,000 SALT cap. We got to fix it, and that's the term the president used.
They're not off.
You want me to finish the answer? We got to fix it, like the president said, in order for there to be a big, beautiful bill.
Congressman Nick LaLota, Republican from New York, speaking to reporters. Congressman Chip Roy, Republican of Texas, posted this clip on X from his interview today on Fox News.
Is there a compromise for you? Is there a number in deficit reduction? Is there a program where you think you, for example, from Texas, and a New York Republican can come together?
Yeah, well, first of all, if my colleagues who want their SALT cap increase, their state and local tax increase, which is subsidizing blue state high tax jurisdictions, if they want that, then I want the reforms to Medicaid. There's a lot of overlap there for the big blue states that are taking a lot of Medicaid money for all of these able-bodied people. I think we need those reforms. So if they want their SALT increase, maybe they should come work with us on Medicaid.
Congressman Chip Roy, Republican from Texas, on Fox News. The House Budget Committee plans to meet Friday to mark up the budget reconciliation bill, 9 a.m. Eastern. It will be live on C-SPAN 2 television. Also, you can follow it on the free C-SPAN Now mobile app, and we'll have coverage as well on C-SPAN Radio. Wall Street today, the Dow up 271, NASDAQ down 34, S&P up 24. From CBS News, Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell is cautioning that the U.S. could face an increase in supply shocks. This comes a week after the central bank announced it would hold interest rates steady amid a period of economic uncertainty. Powell spoke today at a research conference in Washington about the Fed's review of its monetary policy framework, including strategy tools and communication practices. It's happening this year, something that's done every 5 years.
The economic environment has changed significantly since 2020. And our review will reflect our assessment of those changes. Longer-term interest rates are a good deal higher now, driven largely by real rates, given the stability of longer-term inflation expectations. Many estimates of the longer-run level of the policy rate have risen, including those in the Summary of Economic Projections. Higher real rates may also reflect the possibility that inflation could be more volatile going forward than during the inter-crisis period of the 2010s. We may be entering a period of more frequent and potentially more persistent supply shocks, a difficult challenge for the economy and for central banks. While our policy rate is currently well above the lower bound, in recent decades we have cut the rate by about 500 basis points when the economy is in recession. Although getting stuck at the lower bound is no longer the base case, it is only prudent that the framework continue to address that risk. While the framework must evolve, some elements of it are timeless. Policymakers emerged from the Great Inflation with a clear understanding that it was essential to anchor inflation expectations at an appropriately low level. During the Great Moderation, well-anchored inflation expectations allowed us to provide policy support to employment without risking destabilizing inflation. Since the Great Inflation, the U.S. economy has had 3 of its 4 longest expansions on record, Anchored expectations played a key role in facilitating these expansions. More recently, without that anchor, it would not have been possible to achieve a roughly 5 percentage point disinflation without a spike in unemployment. Keeping longer-run inflation expectations anchored was a driving force behind establishing the 2% target in the 2012 framework. Maintaining that anchor was a major consideration behind the changes in 2020. Anchored expectations are critical to everything we do, and we remain fully committed to the 2% target today.
Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell at a monetary policy research conference today in Washington. The Federal Aviation Administration said on Thursday that Denver Air Traffic Control lost communications for about 2 minutes on Monday, but was able to maintain contact through an emergency frequency. This is from a Reuters article. It goes on, FAA communications failures have gained urgent attention due to a series of telecom outages at the facility overseeing Newark air traffic after 3 incidents have shaken public confidence. The Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy spoke today about air traffic control and plans for improvement during a Senate Appropriations Subcommittee hearing. Senator Patty Murray, Democrat of Washington State, the ranking member on the full committee, asking the questions.
How many of the over 2,000 FAA employees that have been pushed out over the last few months will be needed to be brought back in order to modernize the system?
I don't think any of them will need to be brought back. And I would just say in the characterization of the last 3 minutes, I would disagree with much of what you said. But I do, the DOT and the FAA, we're not jobs programs. This is about a mission. And I'm committed to you and this body to accomplish that mission. And can we do more with yes? Of course we can do more with yes. And if some people who want to retire, we should let them retire. Let's bring in people who are hungry then that want to do the mission.
I don't disagree with that.
I appreciate that. But that's what we're doing.
But what we have seen is really critical employees to the mission are now gone. As I said, technicians and mechanics. You can have all your air traffic controllers there, but if they don't have the support staff, we can't know that they're doing the job. That's what I was referring to.
But I would say that we don't have a support staff issue with FAA. We don't have enough controllers for the skies that we have in America. And so that is the issue that I'm addressing.
Okay, well, let me just say that since you became Secretary, air traffic controllers have twice received fork in the road emails encouraging them to resign, which you have sent mistakenly, but it is.
But none of them have taken it. They can't take it because they're not included.
Well, they received the mail. You're an employee. You got the same email, and I just think it's really callous to suggest controllers to controllers these emails saying your work's not valued. So do you know who sent those emails to our air traffic controllers?
You can talk about the system that we have to send emails out. I think it's antiquated, old, and
I just asked who.
I don't know. No, I don't know how they would have gotten those emails.
You don't know who sent them. Nobody's been fired for sending those.
That they would have had the wrong email for an air traffic controller versus someone else in the FAA. No, I'm not going to fire someone over that. But what I'm going to do is, in lightning speed, we've developed a plan to fully rebuild the air traffic control system. And so the tech team that I have in place at the FAA, they've been doing a remarkable job because it happened very quickly. And oftentimes government doesn't work that fast. And they also saw the problem that all of you have seen. And we have been working really quickly to develop a plan and present a plan. You mentioned money. I do think this is the money that we're going to need for this new air traffic control system is not in this budget because I don't think we can wait until October 1st to get the resources to begin the process.
I recognize that, and I am concerned as Vice Chair working with Senator Collins how we're going to provide that funding. This is a question we're going to have to pursue.
Senator Patty Murray, Democrat of Washington State, ranking member on the Appropriations Committee at a subcommittee hearing with testimony from the Transportation Secretary, Sean Duffy. The EPA Administrator Lee Zeldin went before a House Appropriations Subcommittee today to discuss the agency's budget. He was asked about forever chemicals. There's a New York Times article. The Environmental Protection Agency said Wednesday that it would uphold drinking water standards for 2 harmful forever chemicals present in the tap water of millions of Americans, but it said it would delay deadlines to meet those standards and roll back limits on 4 other related chemicals. Known as forever chemicals because of their virtually indestructible nature, PFAS are a class of thousands of chemicals used widely in everyday products like nonstick cookware, water repellent clothing, and stain-resistant carpets, as well as in firefighting foams. Exposure to PFAS has been associated with metabolic disorders, decreased fertility in women, developmental delays in children, and increased risk in some prostate, kidney, and testicular cancers, according to the EPA. That was from the New York Times. Here are the questions to the EPA Administrator Lee Zeldin from Congresswoman Shelley Pingree, Democrat from Maine, Subcommittee Ranking Member.
PFAS continues to be a serious problem for Americans, impacting our water, our land, and our health. In my home state of Maine, we've been leading the way on addressing PFAS contamination and hope to continue to work with the EPA to ensure all Americans are protected from PFAS pollution. The most recent PFAS drinking water standard will go far to protect Americans from PFAS contamination, but there still are challenges to these standards in court, and just yesterday, the agency announced steps to weaken the rule by rescinding the regulation on 4 types of PFAS, developing an exemption framework and delaying compliance. The science is sound, and there's no question that PFAS is harmful to human health, so why is the EPA not fully committed to defending all PFAS rules? Why would the agency consider an exemption to harmful pollutants in our drinking water? And how will the integrity and innovation of research for PFAS be upheld in an agency that is reducing its scientific capacity?
Thank you, Ranking Member. When I served in the House, I was a member of the PFAS task force representing the district with a lot of PFAS issues, voted for the PFAS Action Act. The agency, since over the course of multiple administrations now, have been working on this important issue. 2 things as it relates to yesterday morning's announcement, because it was involving 6 chemicals. As it relates to PFOS and PFOA, the drinking water standard that was set at 4 parts per trillion is staying. There is litigation, as you pointed out. And as a consequence of that litigation, we're reminded how important it is when going through a regulatory process that the agency and agencies must follow the law for how to make a regulation. There was a procedural error with regards to how the agency had set the drinking water standard as it relates to 4 of the chemicals which you referenced. They combined the preliminary regulatory determination with the proposed rule, which means that the EPA skipped a traditional step in the rulemaking process by issuing the proposed drinking water standard at the same time that it proposed the formal decision to regulate PFAS, rather than doing those steps separately. Now, here's the thing for somebody like you who would want to see the agency go after these 4 chemicals. As a result of this process, the drinking water standard might be lower. The number, which is 4 parts per trillion, may end up being 2 at the end of this process. So the public reporting for some in the media that would see our announcement from yesterday morning and say they're rolling back the standards, they're weakening the limit. Hopefully, those people are also willing to write a follow-up to their story just to put out accurate information.
EPA Administrator Lee Zeldin, questioned by Shelley Pingree, Democrat from Maine, ranking member on the House Appropriations Subcommittee holding today's hearing. Washington Today continues in a moment.
Democracy is always an unfinished creation.
Democracy is worth dying for.
Democracy belongs to us all.
We are here in the sanctuary of democracy.
Great responsibilities fall once again to the great democracies.
American democracy is bigger than any one person.
Freedom and democracy must be constantly guarded and protected.
We are still, at our core, a democracy.
This is also a massive victory for democracy and for freedom.
This is C-SPAN Democracy Unfiltered. Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast on the free C-SPAN Now mobile app and wherever you get your podcasts. Story from AP. President Donald Trump arrived in the United Arab Emirates Thursday for the last leg of his first major foreign trip. Air Force One was given a fighter jet escort into the country's airspace, just as Saudi Arabia and Qatar offered on the first stops of his Mideast trip. Trump was greeted by UAE President Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan and later visited the Sheikh Zayed Grand Mosque, among the largest mosques in the world. He's attending a state dinner at the presidential palace in Abu Dhabi. That was from Associated Press. Before the president left Qatar, he attended a business roundtable and also spoke to a few thousand U.S. troops stationed at the Al Udeid Air Base.
As you know, I'm in the midst of a very historic trip, visiting the key partners in the Gulf. We had just some incredible stopovers and a wonderful day. Yesterday we had the dinner, however, with His Highness the Emir, and he is. I'm going to see him in a little while. I'm going to be saying goodbye to him, but we'll be saying hello again very, very soon. But no visit in the Gulf would be complete without stopping to salute the people who keep America safe, strong, and free, and the patriots of the United States Army, Navy, Space Force. I love Space Force. That's I have to say, that's my little baby. You know, I started that. They said, that will never work. Oh, it worked. You know, we were way behind Russia and China, and now we're way, way ahead of everybody. So Space Force, I'm very happy. That was not since the Air Force has that happened. So we created a force, and it's a big force, and it's a brilliant force. So Space Force, thank you for doing such a great job. The Marines, and of course, the United States Air Force. Al Udeid is the home of the legendary 379th Air Expeditionary Wing, known as the Grand Slam Wing. We also have the 1st Expeditionary Theater Support Group. You got them all. And let's not forget the top-notch Army soldiers from the 11th Air Defense Artillery, the Imperial Brigade. Thank you, fellas. That's great. We also have the 8th Expeditionary Air Mobility Squadron, known as Mighty Ochos. Where are the Ochos? We don't want to fight with them. All of you are the tip of the spear. You're the finest we have. Anywhere in the world, you're the finest we have. You're the finest anyone has in the fight against the enemies of civilization. You're the people that are defeating chaos, combating terror, defending our interests, supporting our allies, securing our homeland, and making America incredibly proud. And you know what? Making America great again. That's what's happened. It's happened very fast. Happened very fast. As president, my priority is to end conflicts, not start them, but I will never hesitate to wield American power if it's necessary to defend the United States of America or our partners. And this is one of our great partners right here.
President Donald Trump at the Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar. He's now in United Arab Emirates for what's expected to be his final stop on his Middle East trip. Another Associated Press article, Secretary of State Marco Rubio says U.S. expectations are low for talks Friday on the Russia-Ukraine war. That's after Russian President Vladimir Putin declined to attend the talks hosted by Turkey and sent only a low-level Russian delegation instead. That helps scuttle hopes that the talks in Turkey could see Putin get together with President Donald Trump and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky to potentially jumpstart efforts for a ceasefire. That was from AP. We'll hear from Secretary Rubio in a moment, but first, President Trump answering a reporter's question on Air Force One during the flight from Qatar to UAE.
Mr. President, are you disappointed in the level of the delegation that the Russians sent to Turkey?
I don't know anything about it. I'm not disappointed in anything. Who are you from?
BBC News.
I'm not disappointed. Why would I be disappointed? We just took in $4 trillion, and he says, are you disappointed about a delegation? I know nothing about a delegation. I haven't even checked. Look, nothing's going to happen until Putin and I get together, okay? And obviously he wasn't going to go. He was going to go, but he thought I was going to go. He wasn't going if I wasn't there. And I don't believe anything's going to happen, whether you like it or not, until he and I get together. But we're going to have to get it solved because too many people are dying.
President Donald Trump answering reporters' questions on Air Force One, and now Secretary of State Marco Rubio meeting with reporters in Turkey.
Secretary, can I just just ask you about tomorrow. It's been a little bit messy. When do the talks start? Will you be meeting with the Russian officials tomorrow in Istanbul? What will be the format of the talks? Will it be bilateral between Russians and Ukrainians, or will Americans be in the room?
Well, first of all, I'll be meeting tomorrow with the Foreign Minister, Fidan, and a Ukrainian delegation, a senior delegation from Ukraine that'll be in town. And so I'll meet with them. Someone from our team will be involved in the Russia talks. They sent a more lower level group over here. I hope that those talks will be between Ukraine and Russia with our Turkish counterparts in the room, along with someone from our team or members of our team at the appropriate level. But I want to be frank, I don't think, we don't have high expectations of what will happen tomorrow. And frankly, at this point, I think it's abundantly clear that the only way we're going to have a breakthrough here is between President Trump and President Putin. It's going to require that level of engagement to have a breakthrough in this matter. I don't think anything productive is actually going to happen from this point forward until they engage in a very frank and direct conversation, which I know President Trump is willing to do.
Do you think that moment is closer? Between the two?
Well, the president is impatient to end this war. He's impatient, as he's been clearly said, that something needs to happen soon. Too many people are dying. There's too much destruction. And I think he's ready to have that engagement and determine once and for all if there's a path forward and what that path is. And it's my assessment that I don't think we're going to have a breakthrough here until the president and President Putin interact directly on this topic.
But is there any pressure of a deadline on President Putin? Because I mean, it's 2.5 weeks now since you said that there wasn't concrete progress that you would, and you said at the time now that you would withdraw as mediators.
Well, we haven't been chasing this around the world anymore. I mean, that's already happened. We came because we were told that I was going to be here anyways, obviously, but we came because we were told that there might be a direct engagement between the Russians and the Ukrainians. That was originally the plan. You all heard the same thing. That was not to be the case, or if it is, it's not at the levels we had hoped it would be at. I hope I'm wrong. I hope they have tremendous breakthrough tomorrow if they talk. But I frankly do not believe that we're going to have a breakthrough here until President Trump sits face to face with President Putin and determines what his intentions are moving forward.
Secretary of State Marco Rubio with reporters in Antalya, Turkey. Another Associated Press article on what he's doing there. NATO foreign ministers on Thursday debated an American demand to massively ramp up defense investment as the United States focuses on security challenges outside of Europe. At talks in Antalya, Turkey, NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte said more investment and military equipment are needed to deal with threats posed by Russia and terrorism, but also by China, which has become the focus of U.S. concern. He said, when it comes to the core defense spending, we need to do much, much more. He underlined that once Russia's war in Ukraine is over, Moscow could reconstitute its armed forces within 3 to 5 years. That was from Associated Press. Back in Washington, D.C., Vice President J.D. Vance spoke today at the annual National Peace Officers Memorial Service on the west front of the U.S. Capitol, part of National Police Week. Officer.com has an article. This year, 345 new names of fallen officers were added to the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial. Engravers began over a month ago to make sure work was done for Police Week, according to the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial Fund. Memorial has the names of over 24,000 fallen officers. It starts in 1786. Vice President J.D. Vance paid tribute to those who risked their lives to protect their communities, and he also spoke about action taken by the Trump administration that he says is in support of law enforcement.
But I'm here today to tell you that our administration, and I believe the whole of the American community, stands with you, both as fellow citizens, but also as beneficiaries of the ultimate sacrifice laid down by your loved ones. We love you, and we're grateful to you. Their names will never be forgotten, nor will their heroic act of service, which inspire our nation and fill us with great purpose. I hope you know how deeply our administration, from President Trump on down, care about them and care about you. Backing our nation's fallen officers as well as their families has been a consistent priority the president's whole life, from when he was a real estate developer in New York to now when he's the president of the United States. The president and all of us, we love you. we care about you, and we will do everything in our power to help you. It's why last month he took executive action to defend our nation's law enforcement officers, including by creating strong new legal protections and directing federal resources to improve training and pay. It's why our great Attorney General here, the Department of Justice, is working even today with punishing state and local jurisdictions that restrict our peace officers' ability to do their jobs, and with pursuing the death penalty for criminals who murder our cops. And finally, it's why the President cares so deeply about the crisis we inherited at the border, about stopping the violent criminals, the cartels, and the culture of lawlessness that were allowed to pervade our nation for far too many years. And while we're talking about policy, I want to be clear about one last thing. The Trump administration has zero tolerance for anyone who threatens to defund, abolish, or otherwise diminish our law enforcement heroes. And I know that none of us here like crime, but last year in November, I think the American people killed the defund the police movement, and they used Donald J. Trump as the murder weapon. It is gone from this country, and we're never going to let it come back.
Vice President J.D. Vance at the National Peace Officers Memorial Service on the west front of the U.S. Capitol during this National Police Week. Also today, he announced he'll be leading a U.S. delegation to Vatican City this weekend to attend the inaugural Mass of Pope Leo XIV on Sunday. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, also part of that delegation. Several House Democrats held a news conference today outside the U.S. Capitol, again calling on Speaker Mike Johnson to allow the installation of a plaque that honors Capitol Police officers who defended the U.S. Capitol during the attack of January 6, 2021. Congressman Eric Swalwell, Democrat of California, former member of the January 6th Investigative Committee, stood beside the plaque as he spoke.
We're joined by two police officers who worked to defend the Capitol that day. They were not the only ones, but they embody the bravery that day in Officer Danny Hodges of the Metropolitan Police Department and Sergeant Ganell from the Capitol Police Department. We are here to ask the question, how much more do these officers have to do? What else do they have to give to be properly honored and to have this plaque, which is 2 years overdue, put inside the Capitol to memorialize what happened that day? Blessed are the peacemakers. They are the children of God. And our Republican colleagues are very good about talking about backing the blue. But backing the blue is not a T-shirt. It's not a slogan. It's a deed. And what we see too often is that they don't back the blue, they back the coup.
Congressman Eric Swalwell, Democrat from California, at a news conference outside the U.S. Capitol. U.S. House today passed a bill related to National Police Week titled Federal Law Enforcement Officer Service Weapon Purchase Act. Congressman Russell Fry, Republican from South Carolina, spoke in favor on the House floor.
H.R. 2255, the Federal Law Enforcement Officer Service Weapon Purchase Act, will allow current or former federal law enforcement officers in good standing to purchase a retired service weapon at salvage value from the federal agency that issued the service weapon to the officer. Under the bill, the Administrator of the General Services would be required to establish a program to provide these purchases. To be eligible to participate in the program, the officer must be in good standing with the agency, and any firearm sold through the program must be sold within 6 months of the date when the firearm was retired. Current federal regulations require that all federal law enforcement agencies destroy their firearms after they are retired from official use. This regulation costs the American taxpayers millions of dollars every year. For example, in 2022, the Fraternal Order of Police notified Congress that multiple federal law enforcement agencies were in the process of replacing their service weapon. The replacement of these service weapons accounted for the destruction of approximately 20,000 firearms, costing the taxpayers roughly $8 million. Not only would this legislation cause agencies and the taxpayers to avoid that cost, but it would also recoup some of the taxpayers' dollars for the initial purchase of the firearm. American taxpayers should not be forced to pay for a service weapon twice, once at the initial purchase, when it is acquired by the agency, and then again when it is needlessly destroyed at the end of its life.
Congressman Russell Fry, Republican from South Carolina, on the House floor. Congressman Jamie Raskin, Democrat of Maryland, opposed the bill.
Because the bill also now has no background check requirement, it would create a situation in which it would be possible for an officer to retire, commit a crime like domestic violence or assault that would ordinarily render him or her ineligible to purchase and possess firearms, but then still be able to buy a firearm from the federal government without any background check at all. While the bill includes a good standing requirement, as they remind us, this is plainly meaningless as applied to retired officers who may have left a department in perfectly good standing but could not pass a background check today. Agencies can certify that an officer is in good standing when they retire, but they have no way to track the behavior of their former officers after that if they cannot do a background check. So an agency could unknowingly sell a surplus firearm to someone who cannot lawfully buy a gun. And all of this would occur under the statute without any background check at all. The bill also allows for the sale of any firearm except machine guns. That includes not just handguns, but also assault weapons, destructive devices like hand grenades, and even firearms that are subject to heightened restrictions under the National Firearms Act. And it allows them to be sold at salvage value, effectively making it so that the federal government and the taxpayers would actually be subsidizing gun sales. They replaced fair market value with salvage value.
Congressman Jamie Raskin, Democrat from Maryland, on the House floor. The House passed this bill by a vote of 234 to 182, 20 Democrats joining Republicans in voting yes. House passed a second bill dealing with National Police Week, requiring the Attorney General to report to Congress details on attacks on law enforcement and mental health resources available to officers. That vote was 403 to 11, both of these bills now heading to the Senate. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Sign up for C-SPAN's evening newsletter word for word and get the stories making headlines in Washington sent to your inbox every day. Subscribe at cspan.org/connect. Have a good night.